What's a trippy truth intention that someone can set to invite more mysteries of reality to unveil themselves?
Well, a really simple one is surprise me. Here's another one. Show me something about reality that I don't know yet. Or even, this one takes a little bit more daring, but break my reality.
Have you tried that?
Yeah. And it works. For me, the most important spiritual principle of all is actually trust. I see trust as being a choice. You know how psychedelics can introduce you to choices you didn't know you had? Realizing that I have a choice with life about whether to trust it or not, to trust this reality that I find myself inside of. Just consider and lean into the possibility that this reality is extremely wondrous and caring, and that it absolutely can be trusted, and that everything that happens is really part of something meaningful and purposeful and beneficial, and that it's all good, you know. And what if I just lean into the direction of assuming that is the case and play around with it?
Hello and welcome to the James Zander Trip. Today's guest is a writer, entrepreneur, cosmic adventurer, spiritual explorer, and reality truth seeker. He's written more than 1,800 articles about personal growth, and his work has received over 100 million views. He's inspired millions of people to improve their lives and reach for their highest potential. Steve Pavlina, welcome to the James Zander Trip.
Thanks so much. I like being a cosmic adventurer, you said?
Cosmic adventurer, spiritual explorer.
Yeah, that's cool.
Steve, it's such an honor to get to sit down with you in your house and to be able to chat with you one-on-one and talk about my favorite topics, psychedelics, the mysteries of reality, and personal growth.
Sounds fun. Where do you want to start?
I'd love to start with engaging with life. This is a topic that's been on your mind. You are currently in the creation of a course called Engage. And I'd love to ask you, when we have so many limitless possibilities of what we can explore in life and where we put our time and energy to, how do we decide amongst these possibilities, and how do we best engage with life?
Yeah, well, you're pointing to an interesting conundrum there, because on the one hand, it seems limitless. But on the other hand, we have certain things we can anchor it to. So one area we can anchor it to is our values. Like, what do we care about most? So, you know, you can see the formation of a desire there in terms of like expressing your values or exploring different kinds of values. Or you can kind of look to your own unfolding story, your past, like where has your history been and where is your present going, and where do you see yourself evolving in the future? What do you think wants to open up? So you can kind of look at it from the story perspective. I often use that frame when I want to think about where to go next. I think, is there a progression from my past to my present, and then what's the next step in the future? So I'll often think of it in terms of like, what's the next chapter I want to write in my life? And that really helps, because it helps me get a sense of growth there too. And that's like another third possibility, is just focusing on the growth itself. Like, what do you think would be a growth experience for you? And what you're really pointing to here is you kind of need to decide how you're going to decide. And so that's one of the reasons I decided to create a course on this, is that we kind of need some guidance about that aspect. Like, with life seeming so limitless and so many possibilities, especially, you know, with just how many things you can learn about online, you can get overwhelmed with just all the different choices you have. And you get that, you know, paradox of choice problem, where it just seems like, you know, you have 10, 20, you know, possibilities in one direction and then more possibilities in another direction. And it's insane. So you need something to narrow that focus.
How do you currently do it in your life for yourself?
I use a variety of methods, and I kind of like play around with all of them, and then I compare notes between them. And what I find most powerful is when I use different methods and they all tend to point in the same direction. So those are the ones where I give the most weight, where I go, if I look at the story lens, this is an interesting next step, next progression, kind of like my past history is leading me to take this next step. And if I look at it through like the values lens, I see, okay, certain things I care about developing more than others, or certain, character attributes I want to express more than others. Like, there's a time in my life where I was really into courage. There was another time where I was really into the value of honor. I just wanted to like be an honorable person and really focus on that. And a lot of times those values emerge as reactions to my past. So it kind of combines with the story aspect too. And so when I start looking at different lenses and seeing, this lens points in these 5 directions and this lens points in these 5 directions, but there's an overlap in one of those, then I'm going to give more weight to that. So that helps a lot. It's kind of like looking at, things through the lens of like body, mind, heart, and spirit. And I say, like, what does my body want? What does my heart want? What does my mind want? What does my spirit want? And if I get an overlap in 2 or more of those areas, then I'm going to give that more weight than if I just get, an answer in only one area and none of the other ones corroborate that.
So there's a story lens, the values lens, and then the third one was growth.
Looking at what would be a growth experience, what would up-level my character. But really, there are many, many more lenses than that. Those are just some of the primary ones we might use. And I'll probably be exploring even more of those through the development of the course.
Where do you feel your story is taking you next?
Well, as you know, I've been exploring psychedelics a lot lately, so that's been really interesting. I feel like it's been taking me, through the exploration of psychedelics in the direction of developing more what I might call neural flexibility, like just opening up and flexing my mind and my consciousness in different ways.
Flexing my mind, I like that.
Every substance, even every individual experience with the same substances kind of stretches my mind in a different way, in a different direction. It's like it takes me to a different mode of thinking and sensing and experiencing beyond my normal default mode network that, I normally experience. So it's like it switches off some of the filters that I use for, filtering reality. And now I'm seeing a more unfiltered version of reality, or at least a differently filtered version of reality. Like maybe it kicks in another kind of filter that I'm not used to using. That can happen too.
That's a great point, because do psychedelics show us the ultimate truth about reality, or is it just another filter? What's your view on that?
Yeah, I feel like if there is an ultimate truth, it can get overwritten by another ultimate truth. So I never really feel like I get to that center of the Tootsie Roll kind of thing. It's elusive. And so you get a different perspective and another different perspective and another different perspective. And when I've had those kind of experiences where something comes through as really strongly true, there's an integration process that comes through after it. And I often notice my perspective on the intensity of the experience when I'm in the thick of it softens or shifts or changes in some way. So the psychedelic journey is not just about the time when the substance is most active. It's about the days and weeks afterwards too, when you're processing it and you're kind of bouncing it around, with your other experiences. And you might even get some synchronous events coming through as well that align with it or give you a different perspective on it. So I feel like it's more like a wave-like kind of experience where it's not just the singular event or the hours you're under the influence of the substance so directly. It's how it causes ripples in your life afterwards. And that's part of the experience too. So I tend to think of a psychedelic journey as more like a week to maybe 4 weeks, if it just takes something one time, if it's a strong enough experience.
Sometimes it's years, like after a particularly strong journey, let's say from ayahuasca.
Yep, absolutely.
Some of the homework I got in my very first ayahuasca ceremony, I'm still working on today, and the ripples continue from that.
Yeah, I had an ayahuasca ceremony just almost 5 years ago that I did it 4 nights in a row of ceremonies in Costa Rica. And I was still doing more processing of it last year, like 4 years afterwards. And it was coming through. And in fact, some extra information about the ayahuasca experience came through during an MDMA journey. So it was really interesting. That's something I find extra fascinating, is how the energies of these substances seem to be linked to each other, like they can talk to each other.
Wow, that's fascinating. Can you share more about what extra information came through?
Yeah. So the first time I did ayahuasca was the first time I did any psychedelics. So very first experience with a group of friends in Costa Rica. And it was really rough that first night because I felt like as the ayahuasca started kicking in, I was lying down on my mat and I felt paralyzed. Like I couldn't move a muscle, like all my muscles were frozen. And then I started to panic because I was like, my whole body is immobile and I can't move. I couldn't open my eyes or anything. I was just like in this space with it, and I was getting these really intense visuals coming through, but I was trying to move my body and I couldn't. And then I was worried that I would stop breathing because I was like, what if my lungs get paralyzed or if my heart stops beating? And I began to panic. And so then while panicking, I started kind of hyperventilating and I was just like breathing really, trying to keep my breath going because I was so worried that if my breath slowed down, it would eventually stop and I would die. And I would just be dead there and nobody would even notice until it was way too late. And so there was this very panicky experience. And eventually I was able to calm down and it subsided. But I remember calling out for help and nobody was coming. And I was like, what's going on? They said, if we need help, call out for help, but nobody was coming by. And eventually one of the helpers came by and she kind of assisted me a little bit, but she was trying to get me to calm down mostly. And I was afraid to calm down because I thought calming down means calming down towards death, means towards the loss of breath, stopping breathing. And I was puzzled by that. Because then I still somehow summoned the courage to do it 3 more nights in a row. And after that, rough experience, which maybe was like the first, most intense hour of the first night, the rest of the experience was a lot more gentle. I mean, there was some purging physically, but otherwise it was nothing that felt life-threatening. And I was puzzled by that. Like, why did I have such a threatening experience coming through? And I didn't really understand that until the MDMA worked with me. And then I noticed, like, when I was doing kind of the post-processing from the MDMA experience, I felt like this familiar energy signature show up and just in my consciousness. And I was like, wait a minute, that's the energy of ayahuasca. What's that doing here? How is that possible? I hadn't taken any since that Costa Rica experience nearly 4 years earlier. And so it came through and I sensed I should go meditate and try to talk to it. And so I did. And sure enough, it was like, yeah, I'm the energy of ayahuasca. And I wanted to circle back to you because there's something you need to know. And now that you've gone a little further down with doing other things like mushrooms and MDMA, so now we have some more to tell you about that. And I said, all right, what? And it said, you remember that time you thought you were going to die? And I said, yeah. And it said, well, we were deliberately showing you something that you needed to know because it's a big part of your path to do multiple psychedelics. But you had this fear that if you do them, you might die. And so we needed to show you that right away and remove that from your kind of like your mental framework. Get that out of the way right up front. Because otherwise, if you retained that fear that you were going to die, you would not want to do a lot of the things that would be very beneficial for you kind of on your spiritual path. And so it was basically saying that it took me to a place of showing me that, yes, we are strong enough to kill you if we want to. Our energy is that potent, but we're not going to kill you. And so it was like connecting with this other consciousness, this other energy that was so strong. And it was like basically saying, if we want you dead, you're dead. And because that's how I felt at the time. I thought, if this stuff tries to kill me, I have no choice. I'm just dead. But it was showing me that it does have that strength. It has that power, but it also has a will behind it, and it won't use that. It was like basically saying, look, we can kill you, but we're not going to. And oddly, that is exactly what I needed to be able to trust it more. Does that make sense?
It does. For someone listening to this who might have a similar fear of dying on psychedelics or having a really tough experience, is there any words of encouragement you could offer to them?
My experience it's kind of like the idea from Harry Potter of the wand chooses the wizard. And so my experience was, when I was ready for it, the psychedelics invited me in. And so I didn't go out and pursue it. It was friends that invited me to this experience. I was open to it, and I thought it would be cool to do that someday eventually. But then when the invitation came through, I felt like, yeah, I'm supposed to do this. Like, I need to be there. Like, I see myself as being part of this, participating in this ceremony. So I feel like the energies of these substances, they actually invite us when we're ready. At least that's how it's been. MDMA was the same thing. Magic mushrooms were the same thing. Like, literally a free magic mushroom fell into my lap when I kind of met it halfway because I went to a psychedelics conference in Denver last year. But then it just sort of came into my life. It just showed up. It's like mushrooms say, here we are, come try us. It was very simple, very accessible. So I feel like we might probe that space by leaning in energetically, maybe asking some questions around it, go to a conference or something. But I feel like we don't necessarily have to force it. And if it feels like that would kill me or that's death, I actually think it's best not to do it. then. I think there's a kind of a gateway, doorway aspect to this.
Yes.
And that's one thing that comes through in a lot of these psychedelic journeys too. Like I'm even shown some things like you're not supposed to look beyond this door.
Ooh.
Like you're not supposed to see what's there yet. And
Wow.
I've learned to respect that. And I actually discussed that with some friends about that, like, is that a good thing? Friends who are experienced with psychedelics, like, is that a good thing when you see a doorway? Should you try to force your way past it? And the answer came back very consistently, like, nope, it's not a good idea to go through that because those who've done that tend to regret it.
What do you think is behind such doors?
You'll see things about reality you're not ready to see.
Or not ready to handle?
And so then it's going to be, not ready to handle. And it's a lot of processing, a lot of things that you're just not liking. In fact, there are similar things to that just in human society. Like I know some people who've gone into like dating and relationships exploration, and they went really deep with it really fast. And they found things about people that they just couldn't unsee, that they didn't like. Like, for instance, people's deceptiveness and dishonesty in the dating and relationship realm. And it kind of ruined their innocence. And they regretted learning what they learned, if that makes sense. Because they could no longer unsee it. And they just became suspicious of every potential partner because they saw so much deception and so much deceit that it kind of ruined the experience of dating for them. They no longer felt like they could trust people. And so I feel like there are truths like that might be unfolded, but there's sort of a rhythm to life that I really trust that introduces them and invites us into seeing these things when we're ready for them. And if we try to race ahead, we can really kind of mess up our path of growth. We're jumping way too far ahead. It's like when the hero in a story confronts the villain way too soon and the hero's way too weak and hasn't gone through the growth experience. Like Luke Skywalker, not having had any Jedi training, tries to confront Darth Vader. You're just going to get defeated. It's going to be really bad for your story. So you need to go through that Jedi-like training process to get where you need to go before you're ready to face the bigger challenges or see the bigger truths.
What doors have psychedelics opened up to you that you were not aware of, or things you've learned through your psychedelic explorations that now have revealed certain information about reality to you?
Ooh, good question. A lot of spiritual entities just all around, all over the place, like just sensing conscious beings everywhere, like, being able to connect with them through meditation. That includes people I knew here on Earth who passed away and they died, and being able to still connect with their energy and have conversations with them. Having sometimes even conversations for a couple hours with somebody who passed away and just being able to talk to them word for word and converse. Like I didn't know so much of that was so accessible and so possible, or just other spiritual entities that may or may not have even been human ever. And just realizing like there's so much out there in this space of consciousness.
What do you make of that? Because there is also this idea of reincarnation, that when you pass away, you maybe review your life and then you start a new life. And yet you're noticing all these entities of people who've passed away that are still in that space. I'm curious what you think of that.
Yes. What I've seen is, there does seem to be a lot of pointers to reincarnation being real, because that's what I get instructed on sometimes, and just even being told about my own past lives, but not having conscious memories of them. But also seeing where there are memory blocks, it's purposeful. Like it's not necessarily something I'm supposed to know during this human life. And that idea of supposed to know and supposed to not know is really fascinating to me, because I feel like in a way we live in a constrained reality where, so many things are possible, but a lot of filtering is put in place to make our experience of reality more focused. And that allows us to have different kinds of experiences. Just like in any story where the character may have certain weaknesses or constraints, it constrains the story to make it interesting, to cause a certain type of journey to unfold. And I feel like on a spiritual level, there may be a part of ourselves, like our higher selves, our souls, that know all the truth, but our human selves don't have access to that information. And so we're kind of like the embodiment of a part of our soul or spirit going through a certain storyline for the experience, really, to see what it's like to experience it from the inside. Because if you're a divine infinite being and you can just have access to any information, any knowledge, any wisdom all at once, you actually can't experience certain things unless you remove some of that, unless you constrain it. The removal is a bit of an illusion, but the constraints are sort of maintained, I think, at a spirit level, is what I keep getting information-wise.
What do you think about free will versus destiny? How much of this game is set in place by the higher self versus the human 3D self being able to have free will choices?
It depends on your perspective. Like when you are reading a novel for the first time, you don't know what's going to happen. However, the author of the novel who wrote it, they know everything that's going to happen. It's already known. All the pages are written. So both perspectives are valid. From your perspective, every new page is a new creation of the story. You don't know what's going to happen. So you're going through it, even though from the author's perspective, it's totally predetermined. It's all set in stone. It's done. It's 100% complete. So yeah, you could look at it from a perspective of your soul. Like if you think of your soul as being timeless outside of time, they can just look at the entire timeline all at once. In fact, when I connect with other spirit entities sometimes, especially deceased humans, they taught me something. They said, we can look at your entire timeline if you want us to, but we can't share everything about it because they can't tell us about the future most of the time. However, sometimes they can make exceptions. And so I've been able to find the more I get access to things, and that's something that psychedelics really helped open up, is like it gives you access to some things where you feel like, oh, I've reached a new permission level. Like you've got another security clearance level, like, oh boy, now I can see the top secret stuff that I couldn't see before. And so they can bend the rules that you were previously constrained by, and they can see what's okay for you to know and what's not okay for you to know. So once you have a certain level of experience, it's like, you're kind of like able to see these kinds of things. So we can tell you some more stuff now. So I've had situations where they could tell me about future events or even options that I didn't realize I had that were really kind of fascinating.
Do you think it's just one timeline that's written in stone or multiple timeline options for your life?
Again, it depends on your perspective. So they will tend to talk to me from a human perspective where, they respect that I still have to make these choices. But from their perspective, they might know which choice I'm going to make.
Man, that's so trippy.
But another option which I see, and I can't necessarily rule this out, is that there are maybe multiple versions of us, like in different quantum realities or something, or different, parts of the multiverse, going through very similar lives. And we're making different choices. And every time we have a choice point, it branches us into like another self that has gone the other way. So you can kind of think about that. And sometimes I think about connecting with myself who might have made different choices, like an alternate version of me. Like what would be the version of me who stayed in his first marriage instead of getting divorced? And what would his life be like? And I try to tune into his reality and sense what that's like.
And you pick up frequencies from him.
I might pick up some energy of that. Now, it might just be an imaginative exercise. So I can never really know the difference between sensing and imagining. I can imagine I know the difference, or I can say I sense I know the difference, but either way, you can't really tell. And so I don't necessarily make a distinction between those sensing and imagining. I kind of consider them part of the same whole. Just looking at it from different angles. Are we sensing reality right now, or are we imagining this space into being?
That's right.
So it could be a bit of both.
One of my favorite authors, Neville Goddard, states that everything is imagined and all of reality is being imagined, and that in his view, imagination is God and God is imagination, and the whole world is created from imagination.
I love that. Yeah. I like playing around with the space of imagination and seeing how far I can stretch it. Mm-hmm. So that's a fun thing about playing around with the stretchiness of reality, is like seeing how far you can bend it in different ways and what comes through. Just doing, I've had a lot of experience doing experiments like that with like trying to manifest money or manifest social experiences and having them show up. A couple times I've traveled through Europe for several weeks without paying for a place to stay, just going with the flow of invitation and inspiration. Like, oh, where do I want to go next? Like getting a one-way ticket, landing in a city and then exploring a bit there and then not knowing where I'm going to end up, and ending up, going through 2 or 3 other countries and flying back, and just going with the flow of that. And I often have really interesting experiences when traveling. Like I feel like reality opens up more, maybe because it feels like I'm in a more imaginative, free-flowing space because I don't have it filled with expectations and rules. And, like when I'm in my own home, that happens less, probably because I'm used to the space. And so I don't exercise my imagination as much as when I travel.
That's right. I have this visual of when you're flying to a brand new country that you've never been to, it's like the loading screen. So you're above the clouds and the simulation is loading up. And then based on your assumptions and preconceived notions and beliefs about that country, you're kind of filling in the gaps. So when you land, you have a certain experience in that country, but it might be different than someone else's experience based on their beliefs.
Yep. Yeah, I see like a new country as a tabula rasa. It's a blank slate.
Mm-hmm.
So it, in a way, I can say it hasn't been written yet if I don't know that much about it. And the more I write the story for it, the more it has to fit that mold.
What's been the most mind-bending, stretchiest experience you've had through psychedelics or connecting to entities?
They've all been pretty, it just depends on which way you want to bend your mind. So they're all sort of mind-bending. I mean, but one recent experience was when I did LSD for the first time, just over a month ago, and I had all this like ancestral spirit energy coming through. It was like from this Amazonian tribe. And it basically shared that they were all ancestors of mine, but they said not from this human life, from other past lives. Like I felt like it was multiple past lives too. So they were saying you've had multiple past lives where you've been associated with the Amazon. And just feeling their presence and like this whole sense of family reunion energy coming through was really cool. Also just connecting with deceased humans and having them, I would ask them, what's it like? What's it like to die? So I would ask them, what did it feel like to die? And like one answer that came through was, it's like disrobing from your human skin. Like you're stepping out of your human shell, your human body, and you're kind of like stretching yourself back open again. And then I asked questions about like, okay, what do you do when you're dead? Like, what's it like on the other side? And so they kind of share about it and stuff. And
what did they share?
Well, one thing they shared is like a lot of recently dead people like to do something they call just doing lunch. They said, even though they don't have bodies anymore, they don't need to eat because they're still so, at least partly, identified with their human lives and their human selves. They need to recreate some of that as sort of a process of, going back into spirit space. And so they still want to keep experiences, especially with other, entities that remember being human. So they will do something like create the experience of having lunch together. They just call it doing lunch. And so they'll just create that experience, even though it's not real food and they don't actually need to eat and they don't actually have to be in their physical body form. It's more like an energy body and it's, kind of like an astral version of food, but they still have that experience of like eating, drinking, conversing with each other because they need that groundedness. And it really helped me to see just like when there's so much vastness out there, how comforting objective reality can be. Like how comforting solid matter is, like sitting in a chair or walking on the ground and feeling the solidity of it. And even though it may be a bit of a construct that's somewhere out in spirit space, it's comforting to have that familiarity of it. It's comforting to have that solidity. And sometimes when I'm really deep in a psychedelic journey, I need that, like I'll grab the couch or something just to remind myself that, there's still something solid here. Because at some point it doesn't necessarily feel solid all the time.
Totally. I'm reminded of a forum post I read on Bufo, or it might have been DMT, where someone said, okay, maybe DMT space is like the spirit realm where you're in infinity forever. And this physical realm is like a vacation from that realm. It's like we need a vacation from the infinity. And this is why it might be so grounding and so comforting to be in objective reality or to be in physical reality.
Yeah, the spaciousness, the vastness of everythingness can be just incredibly daunting. It feels overwhelming, at least from a human perspective. So I can kind of understand like how there can be sort of layers of peeling off and releasing your old human self. And I get a sense for everyone, it's a little different. Like some people might want to spend many, the equivalent of many, many years still connecting with their human lives, their human selves. And they're, as far as I could tell, there are just like vast networks of ex-humans out there basically creating that kind of experience in spirit space. Like another one that came through, which was really fascinating, was, I connected with somebody who had lived during really last century and had, gone through World War II during those times. And they shared with me that there was this like really strong network of people who had fought in World War II. And they still associate with their human lives from that time. Even if they've had other lives after that, they may still go back and kind of reassociate with what they consider their brothers that they fought in the war with. And so they would kind of just like have the experience of sitting in a circle. They called it sitting in brotherhood. And it was just all male energies in the group because those were the main combat soldiers in the war. And they would just sit in a circle and kind of like be in the energy space of like where they were when they were in the war, because it was so energetically intense for them. It created such a powerful imprint in their souls and their spirits that they're so magnetically drawn to being in that vibrational space again. They just continue to recreate it and recreate it and recreate it, even like decades, of equivalent time passing. And they also shared how even on both sides, like the Allies and the Axis powers, they will have different groups that don't necessarily want to cross mingle. If you can understand that, it's like once they identified with one side, they were on that side. And even though as a spirit, depending on how much progression they've done after passing away, they may see it from a broader perspective where they get it like, okay, this was just all the human drama, and we don't really have to be on a side now. But it's really sometimes hard for them to want to cross over, and they may even get resistance. Like if somebody tries to go to the group for the other side, they're like, no, you don't belong here. Like the energy repels them from it because it was a different kind of shared experience, a different kind of energy for each side. It was not the same kind of vibrational space on each side. And so they really are kind of separate. And so they will have that association to like their brothers that they fought with, but not with the enemy that they fought against.
It's so interesting what you brought up, that even though they've incarnated in other lives, they still identify with this specific life. Do you think some of our lives then carry more imprint than others because of the emotional charge or the events in that life?
Yeah, certainly. Like if there's a war or a lot of violence, that can be a much thicker kind of vibrational energy because there's so many other things that feed into it. Loss, grief, anger, guilt, regret, fear, courage. I mean, there's so many powerful energies that are associated with it. It's not just like one singular vibe. It's such a tapestry of many different vibrations, woven together, all those different frequencies, and it just creates such a powerful magnetic force. They actually invited me into like on a spiritual level, sit in one of those circles with them. Like while I was doing a mushroom trip, and I kind of sat in it with them and just could see their energy bodies and such, and just felt the energy of it. And it was, I would say, like one of the predominant energies there was sadness. It was like such a sad time for them. And they bonded through trauma, through sadness. It was like just like a trauma bonding circle. And I didn't have that trauma. At least I didn't sense it in my life or in a past life, not that same kind that they experienced. And so I felt like kind of an outsider being in it, but it also felt like a really deeply reverent space. Like I felt so privileged and honored to be able to sit in it with them. And it was really potent and really powerful. And it helped me understand, like from an insider perspective, why they would want to do that. Because I felt myself drawn to want to do it again with them. Even though it was kind of a sad space, it was so powerfully moving and bonding just to sit there. And they wouldn't even necessarily talk or communicate except vibrationally. And I just felt like this passing of energies, and it was like that's the energy of the memories that they were all sitting in. And then after doing that a few times, they wouldn't let me do it with them anymore. They kicked me out. They said, you were meant to have a taste of this, but you can't keep coming back to this because it's not your karma. It's not your vibe. And I respected that, and I kind of understood it. So I stopped trying to go reconnect with it. But it was just so fascinating that there's all these like clusters of, former humans who go out and recreate different kinds of experiences. And it's like they're still processing. How I talked about the waviness of like a psychedelic trip? It's like life itself. Our human life is a psychedelic trip. And when you go back to spirit space, there's an integration process to be done, which could be even longer than your human life.
This is what I find so fascinating, because my assumption was that no matter how energetically charged your physical life, when you die, you would disrobe, as you say, and release that and reconnect, let's say, with your higher soul or some sort of higher perspective that sees that physical life more of an illusion or a game. But what you're describing here is that some souls get quite attached, even though they probably know it was a game or an illusion of some sort.
Yep. I think it's different for everyone, though. And it may be that the entities or the humans I'm connecting with more that are presenting as still human, like those, because those are the ones that are showing up in my journeys, then that's the kind of, stories I'm getting. Whereas the ones who transcend and they just advance and they're immediately back into like soul unification and oneness, they may not bother to want to connect with a human who's kind of reaching out. What spirit entities have told me is that when I take a certain substance, I light up in their space like a light bulb. And so then they see that they can connect with me. It's like switching on a light and says, on air. And so they said that's what they told me when I took LSD. They said, when you took LSD, you lit up like a light bulb and we could just see you all in spirit space. And I was like, it felt, my LSD experience felt crammed with like too many energies trying to connect with me at once. And they said that because it was the first time you did LSD, even though I did other substances before then, they said that was a unique experience. And so you just kind of lit up. And a lot of, because I've done a lot of exploring in that space, a lot of entities already know me or they're aware of my presence over there and they know I can kind of cross back and forth. And so when I lit up with LSD energy, I don't know what it's doing on the spirit side, but they said, yeah, it's like a spiritual interface. And it just basically switches you on and then they kind of, go to it like a moth to a flame type of thing, the ones who want to connect. And so that's kind of an interesting way of thinking about psychedelics is that you're switching yourself on in psychedelic space, in spirit space. You're basically saying, here I am, come connect with me.
Isn't it fascinating how many realities could be simultaneously existing on so many different levels? And our soul is lighting up in different sections of reality?
Yes, we are multidimensional beings, but in our human focus, we have such a narrow bandwidth of perspective.
What do you think is the purpose of the human game, as far as you understand it, after all your explorations into the mysteries of reality?
Well, I think it's different for everyone. I think every human life has a different purpose. But I will say they're all purposeful. However, some have much heavier purposes and some have much lighter purposes. That's what I've been shown. Some people, quite honestly, are here just for fun. Their whole karma, their whole life journey is like, they're like, oh, Earth, that looks like an interesting place to try and experience. And they're like, I don't want to do anything deep or heavy or meaningful or purposeful other than I just want to go have some fun. And so they're going to have like a lifestyle and a life that's kind of laid out for them, maybe with some options for them to choose along the way. At least they'll have the apparent, sense of a choice.
Choose your own adventure.
Yeah, choose your own adventure. And it's just going to be fun all the way through. Like they're going to have not necessarily terrible difficulties or trauma or anything like that. Other people will they'll design it a little differently. They'll go, I want to have something more purposeful, or I want to experience this or that. And you have to understand from a spirit perspective, from a soul perspective, where the soul realizes, hey, I'm invulnerable here. I can experience whatever the heck I want, no matter how difficult, no matter how violent, no matter how tortured or terrible. I know I'm going to pop back up to spirit space in the end and I'll be fine. It's like, why do human beings watch horror movies? Why do we watch something so dreadful? Because we know it's temporary and because we know we're not really in it, even though part of us wants to associate with the experiences we go through it. So just as there are a wide variety of genres of movies, we have romances and comedies and action adventure movies and such, sci-fi, all of that is kind of like woven into the fabric of our human lives too, just as we can, choose our human life. So we can choose our own adventure here, essentially, and pick what we want to do. Now, it's not necessarily us making that as a choice in our conscious human lives, but on a soul level, we kind of make that choice. However, I do find, especially through explorations of, with psychedelics, we can get to a point where we can co-create this with our soul a bit more, and we have more autonomy and we're given more access to control the direction and the flow of our lives. Like we're sort of shown, here's what's coming up. Like I was shown some of that during an MDMA journey last year. my first one, where it's kind of like all this higher self energy coming through and teaching me a bunch of stuff and telling me about my path and pointing some things out from my past and why they happened and why they were chosen and why they're important to me. And I that's one thing I really like about like seeing things from the perspective of the future, looking back on the past, is that it starts to make a lot more sense. When you're going through things the first time and you just think this is struggle and this is terrible and this is awful and why did I have to go through a bankruptcy? Why did I have to go through a divorce? But then with the perspective of more time, you start seeing how this is actually a really fascinating journey from the perspective of my soul. Like I could kind of see why he likes all this stuff. And then I start to align with his perspective. I'm like, yeah, that was really cool to go bankrupt. It was really cool to sink into debt for 5 years and go broke. It was really cool to go through that experience. And just seeing, that different soul level perspective about how it's just like watching a horror movie sometimes or watching a comedy, and you sort of mix it up. And then I can start to ask like, okay, do I need to have more of that kind of experience? No, I don't necessarily need that to repeat that kind of thing. Can we have this? Can we have that? And so I find like, as long as I'm doing it from the perspective that this could be good for the value of what my human experience brings back to my soul, like the perspective on it. I think of even looking at it from an entertainment perspective. Like, how can I make my life more entertaining for my soul? And so like, what would he like? What would higher self Steve enjoy, looking down? And if I make choices that are going to be boring from a soul perspective, I could tell they're going to be quashed. They're going to be like, destroyed. They won't even get out of the starting gate. They'll just be nuked. Either it'll happen internally where I just won't be able to develop the motivation to move them forward, or it'll happen externally where it's just nothing but blocks and, obstacles showing up when I try to pursue a certain path. But I tend to find that when I pick a path, when I feel like, yeah, there's some soul value here, I can tell my higher self is going to like this one, then it's like the opposite. Then I get synchronicities, help from reality, unexpected, windfalls in a certain direction show up, just things, align perfectly. And it's like a beautiful path and it unfolds much faster than I potentially expect. One example of that was like, kind of being curious about cannabis and thinking, I've explored mushrooms a lot, and should I try cannabis too? Because I'd always written off cannabis as like, that's just for recreation. And I'd done cannabis like at that point, maybe like 6 times total in my life, and always just with other people, like at a party setting or something, like somebody's passing around a joint. I'm like, all right, sure, I'll have a few puffs. But it was nothing all that exciting. And then I talked to some friends and I'm like, is cannabis a psychedelic? And I got different answers. Some people said yes and some people said no. And we looked up the official definition of it. If there was one, it kind of leaned against defining cannabis as a psychedelic. But other people said, it kind of depends. It depends on the intentionality you bring to it. If you intend for it to be a psychedelic, it will be and it can be. And if you don't intend for it to be a psychedelic, it doesn't have to be. And then I started, as I began exploring with cannabis, I decided, let me give it a shot. Let me try exploring with it. And immediately, like first session I did with it, doing a vaping session, it was a gummy. I took a vegan gummy, and immediately this energy comes in and says, I'm the spirit of cannabis. And it presented as a female energy. I'm like, okay, that's cool. And I'm like, all right, are you like real? And they're like, can you work with me as a psychedelic type of interface? And I said, absolutely, sure. I'm totally that way. For many people, I'm not. And I said, what are you? Like, what are you energetically? You like cannabis energy. And it said, here's a good way to think of me. I am a gift from former humans. Like, think of humans who've died, like, they died and it's been decades since they lived as humans. And now they look back on current humans. And cannabis is meant as an energetic gift to current humans to make your lives easier. It's meant to kind of release tension, release pain, give you a break, give you some pleasure, take the edge off when your human journey gets edgy. It temporarily allows you to remove yourself from, the parts of your life that might be the horror story, but it's also meant as like a compassionate gift. And so I thought that's really fascinating, because I thought that kind of makes sense with the human story too, because a lot of people use cannabis for pain management and such. And they use it for recreation. I was like, okay, it's kind of like a fun gift for some people. But as I interface with it more, I really didn't have any interest in using it for recreation per se. I was wanting to use it for knowledge and discovery and curiosity. And then like a whole bunch of extra wisdom opened up there. And I love when the substances tell me about what they are. Because the answer from mushrooms was very different. Mushrooms said we are more like an ancient energy. We were installed before in this reality even before humanity came along. And we are like an interface to the kind of the cosmic truth space. Even the mushroom network it's so vast and it's so complex, it can't boil down what it is to like a singular, answer. It's many things, but it does give me a consistent answer of it being very ancient and not so human in nature. It's more connected to the spiritual nature of reality, I feel like. Whereas cannabis is very more human. It's like, it's a closer human energy because it's basically shared that it was a gift from former humans to current humans.
Do you find there's a risk with cannabis that people use it to escape and to take the edge off too much and to tune out of life?
Oh, absolutely, with anything. But we can do that with, put this in context. From exploring this with cannabis, I began realizing like if cannabis is potentially a psychedelic interface when I want it to be one, what else is a psychedelic interface? And then I began starting using the lens like maybe everything is a psychedelic interface if I try to make it that way. And so I began seeing, oh yeah, money is definitely a psychedelic interface. And so I started asking even cannabis and mushrooms, like, are these other things psychedelic interfaces? And they just threw the question back at me and said, what do you think? And I said, I think they are. I think they can be. Like, I think if you intend for them to be, they will be, or you can treat them as such. And I think even when you're not intending them to be that way, they still kind of are because it's just their nature. But you're just kind of limiting and constraining what they can do. So if you think money is not a psychedelic interface, it still is. It's just going to honor your intention to not present itself as a psychedelic interface to you. But to anyone else who thinks it's a psychedelic interface, it can be extremely psychedelic.
I love this. Can you talk more about how money is a psychedelic interface for those that are not familiar with this concept?
Yeah, because a psychedelic interface, just to define that a little better, is I would say it's something that responds to your intentionality. Your intentionality makes a difference on how you interact with it. So I found that like when I went broke and bankrupt in my 20s, the way I saw money was I treated it as a power source. It was like an externalization of power. And so I'm like, I'm stronger with money than without money, right? More money makes me more powerful in some way. It makes me more resourceful. It gives me access to things I don't otherwise have access to. It's something I need to go get and acquire. And I saw it as like, it associates with a sense of success and accomplishment. And I put all these vibes into it. And that's what it became for me. But then it also became something that was hard to get. And I felt like when I tried to, earn it and do all these things in business to try to go after it and get it, it just was very elusive. I just kept acquiring more debt instead of actual money coming in. And then I just said, eventually when I was about to go bankrupt, I was just thinking I got to do a different mode of relating to it here. And so that was long before I, explored with other psychedelics, although I could certainly say money was one of the earlier psychedelics I explored with. And so I decided to try something different. And I said, I need to change the way I'm relating to money because the way I was relating to money was all about stress and worry and anxiety because of the debt. And I was like, why am I doing that? It's just like a number in a computer database. It's not even the number. It's the minus sign in front of it that represented the debt. And I thought, that's what I'm creating. I'm creating all this stress. And what I realized after 5 years of doing that, I realized, I don't necessarily control what money does. Money either comes or it goes. And I felt like I could control it. And it always did the opposite of what I was trying to make it do. So I was like, money's just ornery towards me or whatever. It's disobedient. It's not going to do what I want it to do. So why am I stressing about that? So I didn't regret so much all the decisions I made because I thought I made them in, with the best intelligence I had at the time, thinking that this thing will earn me money, and I made mistakes and it didn't work. But what I regretted was all the worry and the stress and anxiety I put upon it. I wish if I'd known what I know now, I would have had way more fun during that time. I would have just, accepted the bankruptcy and gone, okay, 5 years from now, I'm going to go bankrupt. No big deal. I'll go through that. It was not really that big of a deal. So you're broke. You just keep going. You just start over again. And so it changed the way I thought about money. And I thought, I'm going to start relating to money differently. I'm going to stop putting so much pressure and stress into that space of working with it. And I'm just going to start putting in lightness and fun and acceptance and just even surrender. And so I just decided to focus on being broke for a while. And I just said, I'm not even going to worry about money. I'm just going to be broke. I'm just going to do the bare minimum to get by financially. So I didn't try to earn more than necessary to just survive. And I didn't try to get rich or make more. I'm just like, I'm going to only do enough, and then I don't need to worry about money for the rest of the month or whatever. Only do enough to pay rent and bills, and that's it. And I did that for a while, and that felt great because then all the rest of my time engaging with work had a different focus, because before, money was tied up in my relationship with work. Like I was working to make money. But instead, I started working partly to make money, but only the minimum. And then I would spend the rest of my time working for fun, for creativity, for self-expression. And that's eventually when my business started turning around and then money started coming in. And then what's really funny is like, I struggled to, like, this was when I was running my computer games business, and I struggled to make, games that were selling well and successful. And then when I changed my attitude, then I finally had a game that was a reasonable hit for my company, and it more than covered all the expenses and all the bills, and it took about 6 months to create. And so it was just such a mind flip there. And every year since then, that was back in 1999. So every year since then has been pretty financially abundant. And I noticed, like, when I try to treat money as a power source, it flees. And when I treat it as, I treat money as like a teacher or a friend, like, like golden teacher. It's, it's gold is part of money, right? So it is another way of looking at it is it's a golden teacher too. So it has so much to teach us and tell us.
Yes. How can someone that is listening to this start treating money as a psychedelic interface? How can they improve their money ceremony, their intentionality with it?
Well, one would be to do your best to notice if there's a connection, or you think there might be a connection between your attitude towards money, the energies you associate with it, and how it relates to you. And like notice the reflection. Like money, what it does is the reflection of your own vibes. Now, there might be more to it than that, but I'm not suggesting your vibes control it 100%, but I'm saying they have an influence. And we can even see this just through the mechanism of our own mind. Like if we have a positive, more relaxed association with money and with work, it's actually easier to do it. And it's easier to be creative. It's easier to do the things that earn the money. And so just looking at it from a mental level, reducing your stress is going to help. It's going to give you access to your best intelligence. When you're in a stressed state, a lot of your thinking shuts down. It's not as creative. It's not as intelligent. So if you want to access your best intelligence, you got to get yourself to at least a point of general relaxation and less tension. So that's one thing, is like seeing if you can remove some of the tension from the relationship and just see that there's a logical reason for that. It makes you brighter.
I love that. It's like surrendering and letting go in a mushroom trip versus stressing out and panicking in a trip creates
Exactly.
a completely different experience.
Set and setting. So there's the mindset. The mindset you bring to it is going to have a large impact on what kind of trip you have. So many people are having a bad trip with money, right? But why? They don't realize it's partly the set and setting. That may be even the most important factor. So when I wasn't thinking of it as a psychedelic interface back then, but I was thinking it in terms of more of a social model. Like I started seeing different aspects of reality as something I have a relationship with. Like I have a relationship with people. I have a relationship with my home. I have a relationship with my work. And so I thought I have a relationship with my finances. I have a relationship with money. And I realized that relationship was poor and it was of low quality. And I realized the problem was not what money was doing as much as it was how I was relating to what it was doing, how I was judging and evaluating and assessing what it was doing and labeling it and calling it, oh, debt, bad, So whenever I had that debt bad feeling, it was just creating more stress and then causing me to make even worse decisions. And when I started thinking differently about money and just saying, just let the debt be there, let it do what it does, and just start having some fun, start being creative, start doing something that you really wanted to do. And so like that changed the intentionality of my work. Like my computer games before were about trying to get successful, make a name for myself, create a hit. And instead, I created a game where my intentionality was genuinely about, let me just create something cool that people will enjoy playing. Let me create an awesome experience for the player. Let me just focus on the person this is for, and not even knowing who that would be exactly. I mean, multiple people, but just focusing on, let's do something really interesting. And I thought of it as, let's add something to the substance of reality that doesn't exist yet.
What a great intention.
It was so different. And it may seem like a subtle difference, but when I got away from worrying about success and how well it's sold or whatever, I just thought, let me just focus on the art side, not the business side.
The spirit side.
Exactly. So I put the spiritiness into the game. And what's really funny is that actually generated good sales. And it like one reviewer really ended up liking it, a game reviewer. He really liked the game and he thought it was really cool and original. And so he actually helped me get some extra press and attention for it. It won some industry awards too, which I never even thought I would, qualify for. But it was also, I'd say another thing about it is it was a labor of love to create it. I used to have friends coming over and test playing it, and I really enjoyed watching them. Some of that was kind of sadistic because some of the levels were a bit hard. So I was standing behind them with a little notepad, taking notes while they were playing, and just very simple in my apartment at the time. But it was so empowering just to have a different experience, like realizing that I had a choice. This is one of the things I hear so much about people who do psychedelics, is that in some area of life where they felt they didn't have a choice, psychedelics show them that they actually had a choice, or they do have a choice now. Like the choice to not have a bad habit anymore or an addiction. Like they realize, I don't actually have to drink anymore. And they never really thought they had a choice. And then psychedelics show them, there is another option. You can choose not to do that. You may have all these reasons and these
stories.
The stories, exactly. The stories, the habits, you think it's all real and solid, but it's so thin, you could just wipe it away with a decision, a new decision. And then they make new decisions, often very powerful, life-changing decisions afterwards. And that was something I was finally tapping into, that I realized I could create a different relationship with money. And I've just maintained that ever since, because I never wanted to go back to the old relationship. Sometimes I slip now and then, but every time I slip, I start feeling like, this is not where I want the relationship to be. And then I go back and set the different kind of intentionality in. And it always helps. It always makes a difference.
What else do you think is a psychedelic interface?
Human relationships, friends, lovers, family members, other people. So that's one of my favorite ones, is like deciding how I want to relate to other people.
So describe, how is a friend or a lover a psychedelic interface?
Well, like my wife, Rochelle. So, our intentions were like really aligned. And so I remember, setting intentions for a new relationship to come into my life and being clear about what I wanted to have. And I remember setting a threefold intention, because it was, after I separated from my first wife, and we were going through the divorce process, and I'm thinking, now what? Now what do I want to experience in my relationship life? And so one intention was I wanted to be single for a while. I didn't want to immediately be in a relationship again. And then another intention was I wanted to travel some more. And my first wife was not as into travel. And so I felt like, okay, now I have probably more freedom to travel on my own. So I want to do that. And the third intention was, oddly, kind of also want a girlfriend. Like, I don't really just want to be on my own, but I kind of want to be single and have a girlfriend and travel. And I'm like, how can I be single and have a girlfriend? But I didn't understand how that could manifest. But when I looked at all three of those intentions, I'm like, those are all genuine. Yes, I want to be single. Yes, I want to travel. And yes, I want a girlfriend. So I'm just like, universe, figure it out. I don't know how it's going to happen, because it seems like two of those are going to contradict each other, But what showed up was not at all what I expected. It was a long distance relationship with Rochelle, who lived in Canada. And so I live in Las Vegas and she lived in Winnipeg. And the very nature of our relationship, as we started to get involved, was such that we would spend months together and months apart. Because she couldn't be here on a tourist visa for, she could only be in the USA for 6 months out of each year. And I can go visit her in Canada, but also for a limited amount of time. And sometimes we would travel together too. So we ended up traveling a lot together. And the very nature of our relationship required that at least one of us were traveling at all times. And it was really fascinating. And eventually, after 8 years of that, we got married. And now we, live together. We got married in 2018. But it was fascinating to do that from 2010 to 2018, with the long distance thing. And oddly, it was just what I needed. She wanted to get married a little sooner, but I needed more time. And it was not that I needed time about the doubts or anything. I didn't have any doubts about our relationship. I just felt like I needed some time to be, after going through the divorce, I just needed more years to be single and just to feel that. And just not, even though we were in a relationship, like legally single, not married, I just wanted to have some extra spaciousness of that vibe in my life, kind of like more of a separation space between first marriage and second marriage. I wanted to have more time just, in the flow of our long distance relationship. And even though it was complex sometimes having to do all the travel, I loved it. All those 8 years were, together were wonderful. And the 6 years since then have been wonderful too. So it's just been beautiful, but different modes. So that's something to do with the psychedelic interface, because I put out the intentionality of what I wanted, not knowing how it would show up. And when it came in through kind of like a window, it surprised me.
It's amazing how both of those intentions show up.
I would not have asked for a long distance relationship. I would have said no. I would have ruled that out. Even when we were getting into it, it was clear we were just like ridiculously compatible, like two peas in the same pod. We were just like, such an easy time together. And I remember just like being fascinated by how easy the relationship was. Like when I got rid of the mindset that a relationship has to be work, and then it could just be what I wanted it to be and be fun and be good for both of us. It's just been a delight. Like our relationship feels like it's just so much pleasure and so much delight and so much fun and wonder. It seems like we're just so compatible. We just always want to do the same things together. It's like we never have to really fight or argue or, try to persuade each other. It's sort of like that Jerry Maguire line, you had me at hello. Where it's just like, you don't have to give this long speech to convince the other person about anything. Just say hello and you're in. It was kind of like that.
I love that intention of easiness and ease. And I wonder where else in our life we are making our life harder or more work than necessary. And what if we imbued reality with the intention of, show me how easy it can get. Show me how much ease and flow I can experience in my work, in my friendships, in my relationships, in my life. Have you played around with the volume of how easy life could get or how much flow you can experience?
Yes, and I find it's very much related to how cooperative I am with what I sense about a soul level intention for this life. And so if I try to use the ease and the lightness to escape my lessons here,
right,
my growth path, it won't work. But if I can use the ease and lightness to align with my growth path, then it does work.
Ooh.
So for example, in my first marriage, that one did entail a lot of work. There was a lot of, rough spots and it was challenging and we did eventually separate. But I still see it as a beautiful marriage, a beautiful experience. And I don't regret it at all. I'm glad I had that experience. And it was good for both of us in different ways. But it's like, as one friend said, you completed your marriage. And I feel like that's what it was. Like we were both meant to be in each other's lives. It felt very spiritual. It was just like definitely a relationship that was meant to be, but it involved more work and, more struggles in some way. And I think, it was about us teaching each other things. We were really teaching each other a lot of stuff along the way. And we had to learn a lot from each other. And part of us resisted those lessons. And the more we resisted the lessons, the more difficult the relationship was. But one of the most tough lessons to learn was, now it's time to let it go. And that was really tough to realize. That was kind of a realization we both eventually had. That was like, this relationship it needs to end. It needs to be done, or at least have a different form. But it can't be a marriage anymore. We need to be in our own spaces, and we have to go on and have our own, journeys after that.
Like the end of a trip.
Yeah, like the end of a trip. You can't just keep taking redoses. You got to stop. So yeah, it was kind of like what we did. We kept doing redoses. We kept trying to reaffirm our commitment. We kept trying to recommit to it, and it just wasn't sticking. It wasn't working. So we tried that opposite approach, like sticking with it. And eventually it just kind of pulled us separately, like our own souls, like, you guys got to get out of this one now. It's like enough. You're ready for your next phase. Now with Rochelle, I think if I tried to do the relationship as like an escape from growth, it wouldn't have worked. And I think one of the reasons it showed up as a long distance relationship is because it was aligned with the growth experience of traveling. And so we traveled a lot. So Rochelle likes to call us life partners for each other. So we grew and experienced a lot together, like as best friends, as companions, as lovers. It's like we go through a lot of experiences together. So Rochelle and I are like spiritual teammates. And even when I see kind of in the spirit space, I see how, like on a spirit level, how already bonded we are. It's kind of like I recognized Rochelle. Like on a spirit level, we were already together, like we already knew each other. And we just, even though we grew up in different countries, we had different kind of experiences. It's like, on a soul level, we're super compatible. And I just feel like that's just how our relationship is. But the purpose is we do explore a lot of growth experiences. We just don't explore them through the mechanism of conflict. We explore them through the mechanism of cooperation and co-creation. And so, that's an interesting thing, is to realize you don't have to grow through conflict unless you think you do. If you think conflict is necessary for growth, then it's likely to be part of your path. But if you realize there are alternatives, but you have to choose those alternatives, you have to choose the growth in them. You can't just choose the lack of conflict for its own sake. You got to choose that as part of your path of growth. You can say, I want to do a conflict-free path, but it's still going to help me grow, and it's still going to help me explore and experience and bring value back to my soul level. And I think if you do that, you can really transcend needing to have a lot of conflict and strife and stress and worry in your life.
As long as you choose growth.
Yeah, choosing growth, or choosing whatever it is for your soul. My soul seems very aligned with having my human experience, my human story be about growth, because that's the nature of the work I do, personal growth, self-development. It's been a big part of my path for a long time. But I also see that that's the human story. That's the human illusion. And even my higher self tells me, you don't even really need to grow. It's kind of an illusion. You could just be. And so then there's I start exploring the growth aspect in beingness. Like, what is it like to just be sometimes and not grow? But then I find, my human self still loves the experience of growth, even though he realizes it's a bit of a self-delusion. It's fun for his story. And so when I look at it from a higher self perspective, and I kind of look down on my human self, not looking down in a negative way, but just looking down upon him as as what he's reading into his story and seeing what he's going through, I still find it kind of fascinating. And I go, yeah, he likes growth. So sometimes I think of myself that way, and like, oh yeah, Steve likes this stuff. So what do you want to do? What do you want to keep doing that? Sure. And that's what, like, when my higher self came through in an MDMA session, he took me around all around the house and just looking at different aspects of my life too, my work. And he still, I still feel his energy kind of in the background coming through sometimes. He'll say, what do you think about that? Do you like that? Do you want to drink coffee, or do you want to be caffeine free? He's like, how do you feel? What do you think? And I'm like, I think right now I kind of want to be caffeine free. And so he's like, okay, then do that. So he'll just ask me things like, does this align with you? Do you feel like you want this energy in your life? And he really shows me how everything is truly a choice when we realize it's a choice. But there's part of our journey sometimes where we're not even meant to see that it's a choice. Uh-huh. Because if we did see that it was a choice, we would choose not to do it. So sometimes I think our spirits put us in certain circumstances where it's not, on our human level, we don't feel like we can choose.
It's so interesting to hear from someone who for 20 years has been running a blog on personal growth to say that growth is kind of an illusion and you can just be. Can you talk more about the difference between just being and growing, and how we should make that choice in our own personal lives?
Yeah, it's like getting associated with the character in a story. So you watch, like yesterday, Rochelle and I watched a movie. We watched the Godzilla versus King, or Godzilla times King Kong movie, the new Empire one. And it was fun, especially on our sound system and stuff. It was all boomy and the subwoofers and stuff. It was, the whole house is shaking with all the monster battles and stuff. But I kind of wanted to just watch the movie, because I thought it would be fun. And so you're getting into the plight of the characters, you're getting into their story and stuff, maybe associated with King Kong and stuff, or the human characters in the story. And it's just a playful movie, but when you're associated with the characters, you kind of understand this progression of what they got to do to succeed with their purpose in the end. And I think it's kind of like that with the higher self and in human self perspective. It's like you can go into the story of it and you experience the growth of the characters, but you also realize you don't need that because it's just a movie, right? So you're like, oh, I want the character to succeed. But what if something happened, halfway through and you couldn't finish the movie? You might still feel yourself drawn into the story, even though it's a delusion. When many years ago, when I was living in LA and I watched the movie Schindler's List, there was an earthquake. It was actually an aftershock of the 1994 Northridge earthquake, which I was in, and months later, I think it was, I was seeing a movie in a movie theater, and there was a really powerful aftershock, and they had to shut down the movie halfway through. And so I'm like, oh, I've seen this, Schindler's List is a long movie too. And I'm like, I saw first half of it. I'm like, oh, I got to see the second half. So, when the theater, I think it had to have some minor repairs or something. When it reopened again, I went back and I saw it again because I was so invested in the story, even though I know it's just a story and you don't have to finish it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you feel like compelled to because you're kind of in the thick of it. I think it's kind of like that with our human lives too. Even though we can go to a spirit level perspective and think, I don't have to finish this and I don't have to finish the story. It's like finishing stopping a book partway through. I could just stop and let it go.
There's an investment in it.
But the eddies that we create in our human selves, like that energy, it wants to complete the journey. It wants to finish. And it feels kind of unsatisfying if we don't finish. I think that could be part of reincarnation too. Like we do our human lives and we feel like we screwed up some part of it, or we didn't finish what we did, or we left some things out. It's like, I got to go back. I got to go. I don't need a redo. I need to, maybe a similar type of life, maybe a different type of life, but there's more to the story I need to experience, and we're not done yet. So
how do we know when we complete a life?
Well, when we're dead, but I mean, that's the end of it. But I feel like there's an energy shift that happens. It's kind of like with the psychedelic journey, like how do you know when the trip is over? Because maybe you've had an experience too, but I know I have, where it's like, I could tell the substance, the strength of it is fading out, but I'm not wanting to be done yet. I'm like, I want to keep going. And I don't necessarily want to redose, but I want to keep talking to its energy.
Yes.
And keep going with it. And so then I will just shift to a different mode with it, like journaling or something. And eventually the substance might tell me, okay, we're done. Like, you can go, go have lunch, go whatever, you can go on with your day. You don't have to keep continuing here. But it's kind of like a gradual fade out process sometimes, like the end of a trip doesn't necessarily have a sharp line where it's like, okay, you're done now. It fades out gradually. And even when you may get up and start moving around and go on with the rest of your day, you may still feel the substance energy there in the background kind of working with you.
Mm-hmm. Talk to me about integration and how you have been integrating the lessons that you've learned from psychedelics. What do you think has been the most potent lesson for you to integrate from your experiences?
It's different with every trip, every experience. Sometimes it's just a few hours, thinking about it a little bit more, and I'm like, okay, I got it. It depends on how thick the experience is, like how much complexity there is to it. With my first MDMA experience, it was like weeks of integration, like really just integrating for weeks, nothing else. Just all the post-processing I had to do afterwards. It involved a lot of decluttering, like even going and shredding old files and, old stuff I was keeping, getting rid of a lot of things that I realized were the wrong energy for me now. Like one thing it pointed out was I had a bunch of stuff in my garage that when I looked at it energetically, it asked me, what is the energy of this? And I said, oh, this is the energy of validation. This is the energy of you getting validation from your reality, telling you who you are, shaping your identity. And that included things like old trophies and medals and awards and things I'd won. Some of it going back to even like my second grade trophy from the spelling contest from 1979. I still had that. And I mean, I'm in my 50s now, and I still had that trophy from second grade. Because it told me, oh, you're a winner. Look, you won first place in the spelling contest in second grade. Like, who cares? But I realized, why did I keep that after all these years? Do I need that physical object? And it was hard to let go of it. But I eventually said, I got to just toss this out, throw it away and get rid of it, move it on. And I did that with a bunch of things where I realized this is all for validation. When I started blogging, I had my postal mail address on my website. And so a lot of people used to send me cards and letters in the mail, like, thanking me, sharing their stories, expressions of gratitude. And I had a huge file folder of all those that I gathered up over the years. And eventually people, stopped doing that through mail, and it, it was all through email and such. But I had that big file folder of all the stuff, and I just decided, why am I keeping that? And for a while I was keeping that because I thought that's always a nice thing for just reminding myself that my work makes a difference in people's lives. Like if I ever have doubts, I can always go back and review that file folder, but I never really did. I never really needed to do it. So I went through, all those cards and letters. I read through all of them, like again, and with this experience, it kind of let go of each one and realized, I just thanked the person energetically who sent it. And then I shredded them all. I just got rid of them all. I wanted to, shred them into tiny pieces so they couldn't be reassembled or anything. And it's just like it was part of the processing of the energy of it. So that was a long processing because it was like going over everything in my life that I was still keeping for validation and realizing I wanted to graduate from that. Because I felt it made me less free. It reinforced who I was, but then it didn't allow as much room for who I want to be next to come. Does that make sense?
Totally.
So that's kind of a version of a longer processing. And, it really depends. The processing can be very different. I find it's very multimodal. Like I will do some journaling. I will talk to Rochelle about it. I'll talk to other local friends about it. Rochelle and I do regular meetup groups with the Las Vegas Psychedelic Society. So they have, integration circles where we talk to them about it. And that's really awesome and powerful to have other people who are very versed in the psychedelic space, especially people who have decades more experience than I do, and hearing their perspective on it. And that's just so valuable. I really appreciate, being able to have other people's insights there. And hearing other people's psychedelic journeys is a really beautiful part of my processing too. I find that there's so many, synchronous aspects to it, where what I'm going through is kind of echoed in someone else's, journeys and experiences. Like we can all relate to it. And often I feel like just the sharing, those sharing circles we do, it's a bit trippy itself. Like I'll start feeling the substance energy. Like if somebody starts talking about a mushroom trip, I feel the shroomy energy coming through I start feeling a little bit shroomy, like I haven't taken anything, but I just start feeling that energy interfacing with me. That happens a lot. So it's really, strange. I felt like I started feeling LSD energy before I took it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Do you find that psychedelics enhance manifestation or synchronicities in your life?
Yes and no. I find that during a journey, like I can feel the energy of it wanting to come through more. I feel like it folds me into a space where synchronicities happen more during the trip itself. But I wouldn't necessarily say it's increased the flow of synchronicities otherwise, like when I'm not taking something. I remember having an MDMA trip where I went to the bathroom during it, and I heard the sound, and I realized, oh, there's water running through the pipes or something. I'm feeling the draining thing. And I realized, oh, it's the water softener in the garage that's going through its refresh cycle. So it's like, it runs some water through the little plastic beads or whatever. And I was hearing that water running. And then I realized that was synchronous with my journey, because I feel like I was doing a refresh of some kind of energies in my life. And so I'm like, but then at the time I had the thought, is it the MDMA that's making me connect those dots and makes it seem synchronous?
Or is it reality itself?
Or is that really synchronous?
Yes.
And like, why, when the extra synchronicities start happening during a journey, it makes me wonder, is like, I feel like the substances somehow open up energies that do change my reality somehow. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
I feel that.
You feel it?
I feel like on a mushroom trip.
Like with music, right?
The music seems incredibly synchronistic with what's going on inside. And also, right after a trip, when I check my phone, I'll often get messages or texts from people I haven't heard in a while. There's weird, trippy things. Also, the inner world and the outer world. So when I'm having a difficult experience during mushrooms, someone will rev their motorcycle really loud at the exact moment, versus when I'm back into peaceful mode, everything gets really quiet. And there seems to be a really direct connection, for me anyway, of the inner and the outer reflecting each other very quickly in psychedelic trips.
Fascinating. Yeah. I do get that too, maybe for a short time after the experience too. But yeah, but I'm kind of in a flow of a lot of synchronicities normally. So I think maybe what happened is, like, money being my main psychedelic, my first one, the first major one, I guess I could say. I'm not even sure if it was the first, but first where I really started having an awareness about the power of the relationship, the way you relate to something. That's when I started getting a bigger flow of synchronicities. So maybe it's true. It depends on how we define psychedelic. If we include money, then it definitely started increasing in my life when I started interfacing with money differently.
Lately, you've been using psychedelics before bed, right?
Yeah, mushrooms.
I'm curious how that's been and what sort of explorations you've been doing there.
So I got curious about what it would be like to take mushrooms before bed, just like mini doses. And I found it really has a fascinating effect on my dreams. And I started getting a clue in that direction where I would take mushrooms maybe in the afternoon or something. And then I'd notice when I go to sleep afterwards, it would have a subtle effect on my dreams. Like my dreams would be a bit different. So then I just started saying, well, what if I take it right before bed? And then I'm, in the dream space while they're kicking in the most strongly. And I found that was really cool. And different strains even have different effects. So like with Golden Teacher, I found that it made my dreams more vivid, like more real, and also sometimes make them feel longer. Feels like I'm in some place for days. And it feels like one of the things it does is I have so many more dreams when I take mushrooms before bed that are about some kind of training that I'm going through, like education or training. Like I constantly have dreams where I'm sitting in a classroom, where I'm at a university, I'm going to school somewhere. So I feel like some part of me is just being educated about stuff. And I don't always have a sense of what exactly I'm learning. Sometimes I even have the sense I'm late for class, or I'm confused about where to go. Often have that, or I'm like trying to find my class schedule in my backpack and I can't find it. So it's all with this education theme, this educational environment. So I find that really fascinating. With some other strains, I feel like it takes me to a spirity level where I feel like I'm dreaming, but it's not the same normal dreamscape where I have nighttime dreams. It feels like it's stretched another layer beyond that. And I find those dreams, I can only sense what I was doing vibrationally. I can't see it. I can't remember it visually. It's like beyond visual space. Whereas Golden Teacher tends to enhance the visuals. Like I really remember the vivid visual environments I was in, the 3D, dreamscapes I was in. Those are really clear and crisp, even when I wake up in the morning and I remember what I was dreaming. But with say Ecuador, that strain, it just takes me so far into spirity space. I know I'm dreaming, but it's a different kind of dream. It's like a vibrational dream, but it doesn't present as visual.
What do you find most mysterious about reality these days?
Well, all of it. Like what the hell it is, why it's here. One thing I'm especially curious about is like, is there, say, a singular God at the middle of it? Because that's something I inquired about in psychedelic space, and I keep getting the same answer back. Like, your human journey is not meant to see any of that yet, But the clearest answer that came back was like, yeah, there is a central God, but you're in a human space where you're not meant to interface with that. Like it's not really meant to be part of your human journey.
Oh, wow.
And so it's another thing that came through, which I find really fascinating, is I asked about religion and like, all these structured religions we have and all the different belief systems. I'm like, what is all that? And the answer that came through, this one came from my higher self. He said, all religion is bullshit. He says it's all part of the matrix. It's all part of the human, journey and experience. But is it spiritually true? Hell no. Like none of it is. I'm like, what about Buddhism? I'm like, that's not necessarily a religion. Some people say it's more a philosophy or something, or that's, a core truth. He's like, nope, Buddhism, 100% bullshit. I'm like, what? Really? All that? And he's like, yep, 100% bullshit. And I'm like, really? And so that was a perspective I began being puzzled about and playing around with, because a lot of spiritual teachers I would find teaching more the opposite. Like, all these have the same core truths or something, or they all point to some spiritual truth. And my higher self was like, no, none of that is true. All those human teachers, it's just like they're all part of the matrix of reality. They're all part of maintaining the illusion. And they said the core insight that came through was all human religion is meant to loop you back into the matrix so you stay here. It's kind of like, it's a taunt, it's a trick. It's saying these are the exit signs to spiritual space, but they're not. They just loop you back into human space endlessly. So it doesn't matter what religion you pick, how many times you switch religions, change it around, anything that's kind of like an organized, structured religion, anything that other people are teaching is like a religion or a spiritual philosophy in a way. It's all just meant to loop you back into human space. In fact, probably even the words I'm saying about this kind of stuff to somebody else from their human journey, it's actually just going to loop them back into human space. If they try to transplant what I'm sharing and just use it as a truth for themselves, it's not going to work. We can only really explore and discover our own truths within. So you can't take anything I say as dogma for you. It's not going to play that role for you. It's all I'm sharing is simply a point, what Bruce Lee describes as a pointer to the moon. So you don't want to focus on the finger. The finger is like what I'm sharing about my experiences, my journey, my insights, what comes through for me. But that's not going to be the finger pointing to your moon. The moon is the truth. So, what I'm sharing points to my truth, my experience. That can take me into my genuine experience of spirit space. But for somebody else, if they try to turn that into like their key, it's not going to work.
So for someone who's looking for the genuine exit signs from the matrix, are there any universal spiritual truths that they could look for, or is it really just everyone's got to discover it on their own?
I think it's different for everybody, really. That's what I'm coming up with, because I haven't seen one singular truth for everybody that unlocks it all. Otherwise, we'd all be going there.
Interesting.
Why is there so much disagreement and apparent conflict in this reality, in this universe? Like people say, no, this is the truth. No, this is the truth. No, this is the truth. I think that in a way that's kind of like a hint that you can't necessarily look within the human reality for that kind of truth, because it'll just spin you in circles and you'll have disagreement. Why do we have all those different religions telling you this is the truth? This is the one way. And from a certain perspective, you can try to distill it and say, hey, they all kind of say the same thing. But I really think that's a bit of a stretch. If you read these different religious texts, they don't all say the same thing. They actually say quite different things. They all have different background stories, different myths. And while there are some similarities, I think a lot of their core truths are quite different.
What do you think is the best way for a truth seeker to seek their own truth about reality?
I think it actually has more to do with courage than people realize. Now, this is, again, my truth, but I do think we can learn bits and pieces from other people's truths, but we have to sort of see it like a menu of options and not just take someone's entire menu for yourself, but pick up bits and pieces from what I share that resonates, feel if it resonates and such. But I find a powerful thing for me is when I can summon the courage to invite more truth. Like when I feel ready to see more truth about reality, and also recognizing when I really don't feel ready to see more truth, and then honoring that part of me and saying, you know what? I don't really want to know the truth about this yet.
Wow.
I don't really want to see that.
Has that happened with you in life?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. When I was exploring like manifesting money and like looking at reality through a subjective lens and thinking like, what if I can manifest more? And I started manifesting larger sums of money, and it freaked me out because I was like, this is way too easy. This shouldn't be. And if I felt like I was breaking my reality. I felt like, oh, wow, if this actually works, then maybe all of reality works very differently than I thought it did. And maybe I have to redo my whole conception of reality.
So you paused the truth there.
Kind of, I held back on it a bit. Like I tried to manifest, $1 and it showed up, and then $100 and it showed up, and then $1,000 and it showed up, all within like a week of intending it, sometimes just the next day. And then $10,000 and it showed up. And I was like, okay, I just tried to manifest $10,000 and it just showed up, like an unexpected inheritance I didn't know I was getting. I was like, oh, it just came through. Surprise. And I'm like, am I doing something to reality here? Is this weird? And then I set an intention for like, let's go for like 50,000 to show up. Or I think I said something like 50 to 100,000, something in that range. I wanted to stretch it more. And that one took a lot longer to come through, but then I eventually realized it came through in the form of an advance for my book that I wrote. And so I was like, okay, that kind of worked, but I was also resistant to it. I wasn't sure if I wanted it to work.
You kind of didn't want it to manifest and prove to you how easy it might be.
Exactly. And so just with experimenting with manifesting money, I found like my vibe got tenser as I tried to manifest more because I didn't necessarily want all that to show up. And I also felt like there's a certain perspective where, money may be a less useful teacher to me if I could just manifest my way around it. Maybe there's part of the earning and the spending of it that's meaningful for me. And so I kind of flowed with experimenting with that more instead of just trying to manifest larger sums and just have them show up.
You don't want to break the game.
Yeah, I thought let's play in this game with it and see, and like I really found I enjoyed making money certain ways and not other ways. Like I really enjoyed making money from my creativity. And that was just so much fun. And so I just kept investing more in that direction. And I found like, as long as I aligned with the flow of money the way I wanted it to, it was always abundant and there was always plenty of it. And I never really had to worry. And it was always in alignment with what I wanted to do with it.
So going back to courage, you said honoring the times in your life where you might not want to face the truth and just sitting with that, making peace with that.
Yeah.
Versus
just sort of asking yourself, what more truth do I want to see? Like in which direction? Do you want to see social truths about relationships? You want to know more about how people really are?
What's a trippy truth intention that someone can set to invite more mysteries of reality to unveil themselves?
Well, a really simple one is surprise me.
Ooh.
You know, like I want to see, or here's another one. Show me something about reality that I don't know yet. Or even, this one takes a little more daring, but break my reality.
Have you tried that?
Yeah. And it works.
How did that show up?
It just shows me like so many more multi-dimensional layers, like all this stuff in astral space and just I found like just exploring with the idea of, the subjectivity of reality, like how much our intentions can influence reality, that was like a decades-long integration process when that started coming through.
You did a 30-day experiment at one point where you just lived from this subjective lens, correct?
Yes. And that was weird because then even money felt strange. And I remember the year it was the first, it might have been 2010, whatever year where the very first iPad came out. Because I remember I ended up buying an iPad during the experience because I was like, it's all dream money. It's all dream stuff. And I didn't even necessarily want an iPad, but I'm like, it's free. So I'll just buy one. So I had to go with that. But then I also told myself, look, if I don't want it, I can return it afterwards. And so the funny thing is that I ended up keeping the iPad because I was like, yeah, I kind of like it. And even though it was a lot slower than the ones that are out now, it was kind of a fun thing to just feel into the stretchiness of reality and realizing how much more possibility there are. I realized also I held back in a lot of ways of just exploring and experimenting because of assumptions about people and such. That was especially true with like dating and relationships and things like that. Yeah, like with how, Rochelle and I got involved. And that was during a time when I was just opening up and being stretchier and making different kinds of invitations. And that's really how our relationship got going. Like, yeah, come on over, like you're in Canada, but come on over. And just like playing with the space and realizing like space and time, physical separation, they're more illusions than we realize. Like just because people live in different countries doesn't mean they can't be friends or lovers or connect. So I had all these, just this cascade of limiting thoughts that were, that I was invited to let go of. And so that was part of it, just realizing, oh, I don't need this limitation anymore.
How do you think of time these days? What is your relationship to time, especially after doing psychedelics and probably having some stretchy experiences with time? How do you see time as you get older? Does it change in any way for you?
Yeah, I used to see it as like kind of like a ruler, from past to present to future, like a straight line, solid piece of wood, like it can't bend or flex. And now I see it more like a flexible rubber tube where it can flex and bend and stuff. And it's a construct. It's part of the narrative of our lives. It allows a backbone for story to unfold.
Is there any reality to it at all?
In the sense that we make it real, sure.
We make it real, yeah.
But I also think that we can kind of pull back and look at our whole timeline as one. And I've often gotten that kind of perspective from psychedelics, like even getting a sense of where, my future path wants to unfold and such. Seeing a different perspective on death, that was one of the most stretchy things, is like working with the energy of death. Because I realized, especially when I was younger, I had a really strong fear of death. And I could feel in my body, it has a very strong fear of death. Like my body does not want to die. It's got a really strong survival instinct. It wants to stay alive and want to live.
How did you work with that?
Well, on a mental and spiritual level, I could work with the energy of death and see it and inquire about what it was like and ask about what was beyond it. And then realizing like, well, is any of this real or is this all in my mind? And so I always keep those two things in balance there. Like, yeah, it could just all be imaginary. Like all the spiritual stuff I'm experiencing, I don't know if it's real or not. But when I lean into the experience of it being real and seeing what I can do with it, more of it opened up and for exploration. Like more entities seem to come forth and go, oh, good, you think we're real. Well, great, now more of us can talk to you. Because some of us don't want to talk to the ones that think we're not real.
How can we improve our relationship with time? For those that maybe feel a scarcity of time or years running out, what is a great way to reframe that and start to tap into abundance and infinity of time?
I sort of see the default of time as being infinite time. So I just sort of see myself as like, okay, in time, I'm an infinite being. And it's like, yeah, you die, you go back to spirit space, you may reincarnate again, you could do more of that. So I tend to think of time as being infinite by default. And my human life is just like a story in it. It's just like watching a movie. It's like the movie ends, but your life goes on. So I just see it as like the human life, the movie ends, but your life goes on.
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of changed my perspective on a lot of things like death and aging and stuff. I'm just like, it's all good. It's all interesting. It's all got interesting growth experiences. So I think about aging a lot and youthfulness. And in Conscious Growth Club recently, we had a discussion about aging. Well, that was like, it was really interesting having people to share their different perspectives on aging.
What's your perspective at this moment?
Well, it's multifaceted, So I'm in my 50s. So who knows if I have more years ahead of me than behind me, or vice versa. But I also see how aging is not just something we do as individuals. It's entirely tied into the human story that unfolds in our apparent objective world as well. Recently, I read a book by Ray Kurzweil called The Singularity is Nearer. And I read his first book, The Singularity is Near, or his earlier book. And it was kind of an update on, what's happening with all this technology. And he's a futurist. And so it's all about like what's coming up in the future. And there's, apparently all these anti-aging technologies coming down the pipeline, eventually where we might have the point where we have like, nanobots inside our bodies, repairing cellular damage, keeping our organs healthy, cleaning out plaques from our arteries and so on, and keeping us youthful and healthy, repairing DNA damage. So when we look at aging from a biological perspective, and we think there's the storyline of humanity is showing that we're conquering aging gradually. AI unfolding, the potential for massive amount of breakthroughs in the human story. So the question is, will we need to age after a certain while? A decade or two from now, we may have a very different perspective on aging than we do today. In the 2030s and the 2040s, it may not be as inevitable as it is now. And so that is something I incorporate into part of my thinking about it. And I go, aging, aging for me is not going to be the same as aging for my parents, most likely. And so that is really interesting because it gives multiple options there. There's the potential even to extend human life indefinitely. Like, what if we can keep extending it faster than we're aging? So it's like, today you can live to a certain life expectancy, but what if 5 years pass and they're able to add 10 years to it? And then what if another 5 years pass and they're able to add another 10 years to it? It keeps your expected lifespan can keep pulling ahead of your age. So by the time you get to age 100, now you're expected to live to 150. And then you get to 150 and now you're expected to live to 250. And can you imagine how fascinating that is to think about it? Like how that could unfold where you may not even have to age and die in the same way that people have in the past. That really makes me think about it as like, this is getting very spirity in a way. Because as I change my relationship with death, it's almost like reality says, well, maybe you won't have to die.
That's so interesting.
One thing that came through, and I don't know if this is true or not, but this came through from my higher self energy. And he said that death is different for everybody. And he said, we have times where we're going to, where it's like for some people, their death is preordained. Like there's a certain event that's going to happen and they're going to die because that's what they chose soulfully for their story. Other people, their death is not so predetermined. It's more of like a range of possibilities and probabilities. And there's a number of ways for them to go out. And that can just sort of show up, it's like almost like there's an AI part of reality where it will just make the decision for you.
Different exits.
Let the simulator pick for you, and that some people don't want to know. They're just like, surprise me, kill me however you want, but let the simulation roll the dice. Just as we can delegate things to, electronic devices and let them make choices for us, we can potentially do that with death. There is another category, though, where it says some people get to choose when they're ready to cross over. And then, like, while they're human, they can have their human selves decide. And that's, my higher self said, he told me that I have that option. That he said, as long as you're not reckless about your life, as long as you're not doing daredevil, risky things that are likely to get you killed if you keep doing them, just doing things that are very, very dangerous or risky, and you don't, you don't try to kill yourself killed or do anything in that way. So he's like, don't act like you're immortal. If you do that, you're going to get yourself killed. But as long as you respect the boundaries of mortality, you'll be able to choose when you want to cross over. So it's like, I found that kind of interesting, and that changed my perspective on death. And I thought I could see myself reaching the point where I eventually decide, yeah, I think I'm done. I think I'm ready to go. I want to go back to spirit space. And I've met other people who are like that. Like I met somebody a while ago, I think a couple of years ago, last year, a couple of years ago, I'm not sure when. No, it was a couple of years ago, who was like, she really wanted to go back. You know,
she was ready.
She was not dead yet, but she was like, I so just want to go back to spirit space. You know, I so want to be done with my human life. And I had a compassion for her, and I understood that. And I thought, yeah, interesting. But I mean, people can do that, but it can be really tough decision to make. So I wouldn't see it as necessarily like, okay, I'm going to commit suicide at some point. It's more just like, when I feel like I'm ready to let go, it's like my soul will just say, okay, let's shut down our vital functions and just be gone and just head out.
Do you have an idea of, or a knowing of how your 50s and 60s and 70s and beyond might play out? Have you been shown any timelines?
Not so much that far in advance. I could see like kind of the vibrational currents that are unfolding. But I really like teaching about the spirit space, stuff like we're doing now. I find that utterly fascinating. And I'm curious, I'm especially curious to hear if people want to message me after this, go to my website and send me a message through my contact form and tell me what you think about this. I did get some feedback from a previous, a podcast of yours.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So it was very, very positive. So I love hearing that from people. Not for validation though. I don't need the validation. The reason I genuinely invite this is I'm really curious to know, like, how does this land with you, and what do you think? What's your perspective on this? Does any of it resonate? Does it seem like way too out there? Because I'm super curious about the communication aspect of it. That's something I see as being a part of my path in the next decades. Is like less about the traditional human level self-development and more of I see myself kind of being playing the role more of a bridge to spirit space. And that's one thing that came through is like be a bridge to spirit. It was like an invitation for me. And I thought, that sounds kind of cool. I feel like what life does now is it sees that I've kind of reached a point where I've done a lot of the human story I needed to do. In fact, my higher self kind of said, you kind of did what you came here to do story-wise in your human story. Like you finished it and you don't need to stay. If you want to die now, you can. But I was like, I kind of want to stay. I kind of like it. I like my life. It's kind of cool. I'm not really ready to cross back over yet. And so they were like saying, well, what would you like to do while you're here then to continue your life? Because you don't need to do the same, you're not going to get the same juice out of trying to repeat or rehash the same story you've already done. And teaching about the traditional self-development type of stuff, even though I covered a lot of different facets of it, I can tell it's going to feel stale after a while if I keep doing that. And so it really kind of put me more of this, it gave me the option of doing this bridge to spirit role. It's like you can have one foot in both worlds. You can have one foot in the human world, one foot in the spirit world, and be aware of both and kind of like share with the humans who want to hear that stuff. And I thought, that sounds kind of fun. It sounds kind of cool. And I said, that sounds kind of adventurous too, because in a way it's like I'm rediscovering the spirit side. It's like I'm rediscovering what's going to happen after human life while I'm still in human form. And so there's something about that that's just really fascinating to me and fun. And I find that more engaging than a lot of the human story stuff, like the whole world of business and money and just all the typical human things. They seem a little dull and like boring after a while. Maybe after decades of experiencing it, it just doesn't seem quite as exciting to me.
The tagline for your blog used to be personal development for smart people. And I wonder if now the tagline might be spiritual development for shroomy souls.
Something like that. Yeah, maybe I should update it. It's been 20 years. Actually, this past October 1st was my 20-year blog anniversary.
Congratulations.
So, in fact, it passed without me even noticing it. That's funny. So yeah, it was it's been a long road of doing this kind of work, but I like that it continues to evolve over time. So I don't know exactly where that's going to go, format-wise and structure-wise, because a lot of my self-development journey, I felt like it was about the format and the structure of it, like how to present and do and structure the creative work. I did a lot of writing, a lot of blogging, wrote a book, podcasting. Now I'm, into the flow of making videos. doing live workshops and seminars, doing one-on-one coaching, and then having Conscious Growth Club. It's like a group experience with a lot of Zoom calls, and discussion forum, and just a lot of different ways for people to connect. Doing courses, so many different modalities of expression. I feel like that was a big part of working on this stuff now. And now I just realize it's kind of all energy, and I stop worrying about so much the structure of things and how to package them, and more just like realizing like they're all options now because I have experience with all of them. And so kind of I feel like all these tools are possible. And so going forward in the future, it's like kind of just an adventure of not worrying so much about how we pick and choose the tools. That doesn't necessarily matter so much. It's more about the vibes we explore, the energy we explore, and what it does for us in terms of our human journeys and our transformation.
Absolutely. And I feel like audio and video specifically have risen in popularity partly because you can really feel the vibe and the frequency and the energy, and the people listening to us now, they get so much more data than just if this was a text transcript.
Yes. Yeah. I really feel that that's important. The sound waves, they carry energy, the tone of voice.
Mm-hmm.
Having started with so much with writing, I feel like that was kind of a muted way vibrationally of expressing ideas, but it really solidified my connection to the mental space of self-development, because you can express ideas very crisply and very concisely through choosing the exact words you want to use.
Yes. Steve, is there anything spirity that we haven't discussed that would be interesting to mention? Any mysteries about reality or spiritual notes that you'd like to compare?
We covered a lot of ground here, so I'm like kind of stretching to see what else wants to come through. I would say like one thing I really focus on a lot is like my relationship with the totality of existence, like with this whole, how do we relate to everything as a whole? And I found that for me, the most important spiritual principle of all is actually trust. So that's one thing we haven't really touched on is I see trust as being a choice. And that's like, how psychedelics can introduce you to choices you didn't know you had. Many years ago, I kind of realized this was even before I, explored with what we might consider psychedelics. It was after I explored with money as a psychedelic, but realizing that I have a choice with life about whether to trust it or not, to trust this reality that I find myself inside of. And I realized there's no real way to know if I can trust life. I don't know how the game is set up, the experience is set up, the simulation is set up. I don't know if I can trust it, in the sense that maybe this life is just designed to torture me. Maybe it's just designed to be nothing but pain, or maybe there is no design behind it whatsoever. So I could look at it as something that I could distrust and not be able to trust. I'm just like, it's too random, it's too chaotic, or there's some kind of dark force out there guiding it from behind the scenes. I could say there's evil out there, or I could just say there's indifference out there. And either way, I can't really trust evil except to trust it to be evil. And I can't really trust indifference except to trust it not to care. And so I thought, well, if I don't know what's out there, can I choose anyway? Do I have to be in that space of not choosing? And I thought, what if I just choose to trust reality? What if I choose to just consider and lean into the possibility that this reality is extremely wondrous and caring, and that it absolutely can be trusted, and that everything that happens is really part of something meaningful and purposeful and beneficial, and that it's all good, And what if I just lean into the direction of assuming that is the case and play around with it? So I didn't really try to install it as a belief or anything like that, because I thought that might be delusional. There's still the possibility you can't trust it. But what if I just keep leaning in more and more in that direction and keep exploring it? Like, can I trust this? How can I trust this? What if I trusted more? And making decisions like, what if I trusted more in life, in reality? What would I do here? And making small bets in that direction at first. And then noticing that those small bets kind of worked. And then making medium-sized bets and noticing those medium-sized bets, they kind of work too. And then making bigger bets and noticing, those bigger bets, they kind of work too. Even exploring with psychedelics is a question in trust, right? Like if you take a substance and you're like, this could kill me, this could really go in a bad direction or lead to a bad trip, and yet you still trust it and you do that anyway. So, you have experience making those kinds of decisions. So I feel like that's a really core spiritual principle, is trust in the nature of life and nature of reality. And I find the more I lean in that direction, the more magic unfolds, the more interesting things open up and happen. And also trusting that when you're not seeing certain things, that's purposeful too. It's like trusting the guidance that your reality container gives you.
The design of the game.
Yeah, trusting the game designer or the design of the game, and trusting that it's all purposeful and it's all meaningful. And stop fighting reality so much.
Right.
Because the more you trust, the less you need to fight. Trust is really another way of thinking of surrender.
Can the whole of life be thought of as a psychedelic interface?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, all of it can be. It all responds in a way to our intentionality. So I find that, a good intentionality is just like looking for the lessons, the beauty, the wonder that wants to unfold.
And courage.
Yep. And there's such a rich tapestry of intentions we can put out for what we want to experience. We can choose to, invite pleasure or discovery, learning, adventure, fun, camaraderie, connection, depth. So many different ways we can take our intentionality. So I see a big part of life is just playing around with the tapestry of what we can weave intentionally.
Beautiful. Let's leave the listener with one intention that they can infuse their reality, their life container with, that will invite more spirity things to show up.
Now, what do you think they want to be invited to intend? Are we giving them a specific intention here or inviting them into one?
Let's invite them to a couple of choices, perhaps.
Okay.
I loved the break your reality was quite edgy and surprised me.
That might be intense for some people. You might not want to do that one at first.
What's a good starter?
I think a good starter would be surprise me.
Surprise me.
Yeah. Show me something about my reality that I don't know. Show me something I've never seen before about my reality. That one I like.
And how do people set that intention? They just focus
like that.
on it?
Just like that. Like say it aloud to the walls around you. I like saying my intentions out loud. I feel like it's more powerful when I speak it through my body, because when I speak it through my body, I can feel my body's reaction to it. So I could feel if there's doubt or if there's hesitation or if I really truly desire it and I really truly welcome it. So it may take some time of experimenting with how you phrase and voice the intention and feeling it in your body. I find that the more I play around with intentions, the more I get sensitive to what my body, and what my beingness wants to experience. I feel like the body is kind of an interface to show me my reactions.
So if there's doubt or hesitancy, it means you're not embodied in your intention and it's unlikely to manifest.
Yep. Like if I say, break my reality, I feel a little tension and stress when I say that. I'm like, because part of me is like, no, don't break my reality. I don't want to break my reality right now. I like my reality. It's really good. It's great. It's wonderful. Let's keep it going the way it's going. So then I say that and now I feel better, right? So I just change the intentionality. So that's one way to do intentions is like start with something, say it, and then, like one friend of mine told me to say, if you don't like the intention, say, oh, no, cancel clear.
Cancel clear.
Cancel clear. So it's like you're erasing that intention. But it's like if you feel the resistance, then that's part of the intention. If you feel the resistance, then your intention is to not have that partly or to get a partial match.
That's right. So show me something new about reality, or how did you put it?
Yeah, show me something new. Show me something exciting and wondrous about reality. So when I say it like that I like, that I can align with. I don't want to break my reality. Not right now. I like how it's going. If you have a really negative reality though, you might want to try the break my reality. Just scramble it, reset it, break it, fine. The word choice, the words represent the vibes. So different words can weave in different vibes into the intentionality there.
Beautiful.
So you might try saying surprise me. I'm going to say bring in something fresh and new and wondrous that I haven't seen before, that will delight me and fascinate me.
I love that.
That one I like.
I love that. I encourage everyone who feels resonant with those words to try that out.
Yeah, but don't break anything.
Don't break anything. Not yet. Steve, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure, such an honor to interview you, to learn from you. Your wisdom and your breadth of knowledge is always so fascinating to dive into.
Likewise, James. It's been fun.
Thank you.
I hope your listeners enjoyed it.
If you enjoyed this episode, you can find Steve at stevepavlina.com. You can also send him a message and send him some feedback about this episode, or share your cosmic notes with Steve. For more episodes like this, visit the James Xander Trip on Spotify or Apple. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Take care.